Washington. So Dr. Caspe is a senior research analyst at the Harvard Family Research Project. Her research focuses on how families, early childhood programs, schools, and communities support children's learning. As part of the HFRP team, Dr. Caspe co-leads the Libraries for the 21st Century. It's a family thing project and develops materials to prepare educators for family engagement. She is also the co-editor of Promising Practices for Engaging Families in Literacy and the author of a variety of reports and articles, including 4 important things research tells us about the transition to school. Dr. Caspe has a Ph.D. in applied psychology from the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at New York University and a Master's of Education from Harvard University. So Margaret, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm just really excited to be here today. The transition to school is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. And with the first day of school right around the corner, I know that transition is on everyone's minds. So before I lead us through what the research tells us about why focusing on transition is so important, I want to start with a small clip that I think will put us all on the same page of what transition is all about.
It's going to be really fun when you move into kindergarten.
I just think ABC. You have to be quiet when the bell rings in circle.
When I see other kindergartners, I think about how I used to be in kindergarten. You had to line up from alphabetical order of your first or last name. And I lined up for like recess and lunch and going to the library and PE and music.
Why do you line up?
So I don't get a glob.
I'm waiting until everyone is in a nice straight line in the middle of the hallway.
Yeah. For leaving play court or leaving school or arriving, you have to walk in a straight line. Get on the school bus and just drive to school. When I rode the bus for the first time, I felt nervous.
Welcome to the bus, to my bus.
Actually, for 3 years of school, I rode with my dad because I forgot about the bus. It has yellow everywhere and it has black windows. It gets from home to here, then from here to home.
So I could watch this video all day, but I will pause it here. So let's take maybe a minute to write into the discussion box below what this video made you think about. In other words, what did you think about just as you watched all the voices of the children that you heard? Mackenzie Johnson is writing that transitions are beyond just academics. Martha is mentioning how transition is about a sense of belonging and order. Kids are thinking about the transition too. Laura Fox had the same idea that transition is not just about academics, it's about kids preparing for a whole new day today. There's a lot of thinking about social interactions here. That's great. Antonio Mendez writes the experience of a bigger building, other age kids. Kathleen Moore writes, when in life have I ever been required to walk in a straight line? How do we connect real life to school for kids and transition them appropriately? We'll discuss that a little. Transitions are exciting. Kids are very curious about the new experience they will go through. And Nina Schneider writes about the expectations from teachers, parents, and students. the idea of more playing, less structure. Let's take maybe a few more seconds to type in our final thoughts. Kids feel nervous of the new experience. So these are all such powerful reflections and very much aligned with what we will be talking about today. And just a little plug, if you're interested in watching the full video, or for those of you who do trainings and want to show it to a group, this video and others like it are all publicly available on Head Start's Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge website. And I believe that Sarah is adding the link to the resource box now. You can access it easily. So what do we mean by the transition to school? So at Harvard Family Research Project, we think about transition as having three underlying principles. And the first is that transition is a time when children and their families start to develop relationships with new peers and adults. And it's these relationships that enable young children to enter school with confidence, because as many of you were chatting about, transition comes with a lot of emotions. And the second principle we think about a lot, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, is that the transition to school is a move into different learning settings, both in and out of school. So at the same time that children are transitioning to kindergarten, they might also be transitioning to new before or after school programs. And all of these require adjustment and planning. And the third principle to consider is that transition is a process. And I know Jody is actually going to give you a really good metaphor for this later, but it's not just a one-time event. Transition begins early in the preschool years and continues through third grade. And for the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to focus on the four things that research tells us about the transition to the school. And these are that transition is a matter of equity, that a smooth transition to school makes a difference for children's learning, that families play an important role in the transition to school, and that relationships among families, early childhood programs, schools, and communities are critical. And for those of you who want some citations and would like to read further about these ideas, Sarah's going to put a little link to our report that we have that covers some of these ideas, and that link will go in your resource box as well. And throughout the presentation, I just want to give a nod that I'll be exploring each of these ideas, and I'll provide some research-based program examples along the way. So let's begin by thinking about transition as an issue of equity. So we all know that there's a large body of research showing that upon kindergarten entry, children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds begin school with higher average academic scores in comparison with children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And these preparation gaps can be explained in part by families from low-income households having fewer resources, time, and opportunities to support learning, and also through families having limited access to high-quality preschool programs. And as you can see on the screen in this iconograph from TASC, these opportunities build up. So children who are not read to regularly and do not participate in preschool programs are already starting school with nearly 1,600 fewer hours of preparation than kids with opportunities to do these things, which puts them at a disadvantage. But, and here's what's so interesting, one of the most exciting findings from the transition literature is that transition activities can shield children from these opportunity gaps. So in other words, when children and families at increased risk participate in transition activities like taking part in literacy programs at local libraries, meeting and talking with teachers ahead of time, or attending kindergarten events in the community, these children are most likely to benefit. So in this way, kindergarten transition might be a very important tool in reducing preparation gaps across income groups. So let me pause for a second, and let's take a quick pop-up poll. Nationally, what percentage of incoming kindergarteners attend full-time early childhood programs? Do you think it's 65%, 48%, 26%, or 80%? Our bar graph is moving. And And it looks like our group has actually honed in pretty much on the correct answer. The answer is 26%. So there's a lot of children who are transitioning to kindergarten who have not had full-day formal early experiences. And in fact, many of these children actually have had no preschool experiences at all. So I want to share with you one program that actually seeks to close opportunity gaps by providing summer transition programming for children who have no formal preschool experience. This program is called Stretch to Kindergarten, and it's run by this amazing group, Family Engagement Institute in California. And it's run for 6 weeks over the summer. And what it really does is it hires teachers from elementary schools to run mini kindergarten days, which get children accustomed to kindergarten routines and gives families opportunities to learn about expectations and curriculum all over the summer before kindergarten begins. And evaluations of the program have shown that it increases the types of learning activities that parents and children do in the home, and even increases children's comfort in the school setting. So the second thing that research tells us about the transition to school, and I'll read this, is that a smooth transition makes a difference in children's learning. When children are part of a quality transition process, they have an easier time and enjoy improved academic achievement, more positive social and emotional competencies and fewer behavior problems, and rapidly developing skills. And I alluded to this earlier, but it's important to emphasize that there's a growing understanding that while schools are important for children's learning, schools alone cannot meet students' needs, especially those children who might be most at risk for school failure. So instead, children thrive when in conjunction with their school experiences, they have opportunities to learn in spaces other than schools, such as the home, libraries, and after-school programs. And as you can see on this learning map on the screen, children learn anywhere and all the time through things like digital media, in their homes, and with different people in their communities. So because our conceptions of where learning takes place is evolving, there's also a need for us to rethink how we support the transition to school. We need to think broader, and we need to think bigger outside of early childhood programs and outside of schools, as well as with them. And here's an example, a perfect example of this, actually. So in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Department of Child Care and Family Support conducted a survey of families in the city about the concerns that families had about the transition to school. And what they found was that one of the most anxiety-provoking parts of the transition for families was finding after-school programs. So to support families and increase learning opportunities outside of school, they put together a guide that listed all after-school programs in the city, including things like what to consider when making an after-school decision, or how to contact programs and how to enroll children. And this guide is a simple thing that schools and communities can do that really can go a long way in supporting families and making informed choices for their children's learning. So the third thing that research tells us about the transition to school is that families play an important role in the transition process. And I know that a number of questions that came in previous to this webinar were really about homeschool connections and family engagement. And what I really want to highlight in this slide is that families matter for children's learning and development across all of a child's life, from infancy through the early years, into and throughout elementary school, middle, and high school. But you're also probably familiar with the research that shows that to some extent, family engagement is high in the early years and falls off as children enter into school, in part because a family's connection to the school often undergoes a shift. When we talk with families about the transition experience, what we often hear is that what once felt welcoming and inviting in the early years might become more scheduled and less individual. But what comes out of the transition research, which is really exciting, is that when families are engaged during the transition, they're more likely to feel confident in supporting their children's learning, and in turn continue on a trajectory of engagement over the course of their children's learning career. And I just want to highlight that there are a variety of ways for families to be involved in the transition process, whether it be by engaging children in learning activities, by promoting positive growth mindsets, by helping children become socially competent, or by connecting children to learning settings outside of the home to support lifelong learning. But we also know that families need guidance, and support to do this. So I want to give you an example of a program that does just that. This program is called Comienzan Casas, or It Starts at Home. And this is what Comienzan Casas does. It was started in a small rural town in Maine as a way to help migrant families from Mexico support their children before and during kindergarten. So the program developers were really smart. They recognized that many families wanted to support their children as they entered kindergarten, but they were unsure how to do so because many were educated outside of the United States, and many had grueling work hours, making it very hard to attend events scheduled in the community. So what Comienzan Casas decided to do was provide parents with early learning activities they could do at home with real-world materials or on an iPad supplied by the program. And then to support families in implementing these activities, the program also offers monthly meetings at the elementary school where the kindergarten teacher comes and talks with parents about what kindergarten is like. And then the program additionally visits families in the home once a month to hear about what apps they're using, what activities they enjoy, and what questions they have. So in this way, the program is really giving parents the tools they need to get engaged in their children's learning whenever it's convenient for them in ways that they're comfortable with. And this has really gone a long way in helping children transition to school and be better prepared. So let's take a quick pause and do a poll here. And let's get sort of a temperature read on where we are as a group with engaging families in the transition process. So to what extent do you include families in your transition work? You're experts and you do it well. This is an area you're working on, or this is really an area you haven't yet thought about. So this is great. So this is, so this actually makes sense. It's an area that everybody's working on. So it's something that everybody's thought about and sees some room for growth. So when we turn over to the questions and answers, that's definitely, if you have more questions, please add them to the question box, and Jody and I can attempt to answer them for you. So let's go move on to the fourth point. I'm just going to click it here. So finally, we know that quality transition practices are those in which opportunities are available for all stakeholders, whether it be families, preschools, schools, after-school programs, or health providers, whoever it is, to build relationships and work as a team. And, I like to say that this is really the secret sauce of transition, because during transition, so many systems are coming in constant contact with each other, and everyone needs to be able to share information and communicate well. So for example, parents of incoming kindergarteners need guidance about kindergarten expectations and curriculum, their child's academic status at school entry, the school's effort to prepare for transition, and what parents themselves can do to get children better prepared. Similarly, teachers need information about incoming kindergarteners and their preschool experiences, and early childhood teachers need information about what children are doing in kindergarten and how to help align their curriculum to what will be expected of them. So what we know is that transition efforts are most successful when early childhood programs, schools, and community educators really remove themselves from their institutional silos and join together to do the shared work needed to support children and families. And I'm going to just take an aside out of my presentation for a second, because I just want to give a little nod to an incredible resource that is available to you. So get ready to capture it. The thumbnail picture on the right is of a school readiness guide that addresses all of the parent needs that are listed on the screen to the left. And this guide was created by the Silicon Valley Community Foundation Center for Early Learning as part of a larger school readiness initiative. And if you go to their website, and I know that Sarah's putting the link in the resource section now, you can actually download this guide. And here's the best part. If you like it, you can send an email to the foundation, and they will send you a print-ready customizable version that you can adopt and use in your own community. So this school readiness guide really came out of community conversations about what families, teachers, educators, and community educators felt that parents needed to know about the transition to school. And it's all there in that guide. So I definitely recommend you checking out that resource. So I want to give a few examples of relationships at work. So Ready Freddy is an interesting transition program in Pittsburgh that actually brings together various community stakeholders to develop community-wide transition plans that encourages kindergarten enrollment and attendance. And it's an interesting start. The program got its start a number of years ago when some research came out showing that the majority of incoming kindergarteners in Pittsburgh were not enrolled in kindergarten on the first day. And not being enrolled in the first day of school was actually associated with a high number of absences over the course of the kindergarten year. That clearly was having a negative impact on children's learning. So Ready Freddy supports communities to come together and come up with plans to make sure that early childhood programs, schools, and community spaces like libraries are working together to get the word out about kindergarten enrollment. And they do it all through this green frog called Ready Freddy, who has become, in a sense, an emblem for the city. And, you know, just to give another sense of outreach, librarians actually do a lot of the canvassing in the neighborhood, knocking on doors, reminding families about enrollment. And they also offer kindergarten-focused story times and resources in the library. And that's a great way of reaching out to families who might not be part of formal early childhood experiences yet. And finally, just one more example. Boston Public Schools has a transition initiative called the Countdown to Kindergarten. And this initiative promotes quality transition practices, including helping early childhood programs in schools develop continuity in their curriculum, assessments, and educational environments. And this is something that I know Jody will be talking about shortly. But here's what's interesting that Boston Public Schools has done. They've really taken this alignment one step further and made the museum a real critical partner. So within the museum is an exhibit that completely recreates a model kindergarten classroom so that children and families can play together and get comfortable in a kindergarten setting all year round. So as a quick wrap up, I hope that what has really come through in my presentation over the last 25 minutes or so is that the transition to school really yields substantial benefits for children and families. It improves children's outcomes, and it really sets families on a trajectory of engagement. But it also, you know, we can all be honest, it takes a lot of coordination and work to do it well. But I think we would all argue that it's worth it. And I know Jody will be talking about her district and what she does in Arkansas, and I'm sure that she'd agree. But what makes transition successful is when it's focused on strong family-school community partnerships and focused on reaching out and engaging families effectively. So I'm going to turn it over to questions in a second, but if you're interested in learning more about the transition materials and resources I've talked about today, you can visit our website at hfrp.org/transition, and you can also keep up to date on what we're doing by signing up for our newsletter or following us on Twitter at our handle at HFRP. So I'm going to take a few short questions now, I think, and then Jody is going to make her presentation.
Thank you, Margaret, for that great presentation and the information that you shared. Throughout your presentation, it highlighted the theme of the engagement of families and their important role that they have in the transition. So one of the questions that we have is, how do you help families feel comfortable and build trust with teachers in schools if they are hesitant to participate in school-sponsored activities?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. And I think when I think about transition, I always take a step back. And I think when I think about family engagement, I always take a step back as well. And I'm always careful to remember that transition is a process and family engagement is also a process. So with that, you know, it's important to think about all of the different implementation strategies that are part of processes, all of the leadership that needs to affect processes, and not to be searching, in a sense, for a silver bullet, if that makes sense. So, you know, in terms of helping families feel comfortable in schools, you know, I think one of the first steps is reaching out to families and understanding what their needs are and where they are. I think a lot of the examples that I gave, whether it be Stretch to Kindergarten, the example from Cambridge, or the example from Pittsburgh, they all started really with the community reaching out to parents to really understand what their needs are, what their concerns were. And then they developed initiatives and processes to reach out to them and bring them into the schools in ways that made sense for them. I think another key component of building these relationships is also thinking about all the spaces where families are, that schools are an important space for families to be, but sometimes a librarian or faith-based institutions also are people who are trusted, who could bring messages about the importance of transition, the importance of reinforcing children's learning.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. And we just had a question popped up from Martha, so I would encourage you all to continue to type questions into the question chat box. But it says, what are some strategies that help to sustain the parental engagement? I feel there is a disconnect between the input and output factors.
Sure. So, I like to think about a few things. So I think, as I mentioned sort of previously, I like to think about reaching out to families. So once families are involved, right, there's this continual need to reach out to them, to communicate, to reach families where they are. So to always think about, well, if a family's coming, if you're a teacher and a family's coming to my classroom, what can I do to also reach out to the family, whether it be through using digital media and setting up web portals, sending pictures, creating ways for you to also transmit what's happening in the classroom to families, so that there's constantly reaching out also to understand what families need. And then I think there's also the important ongoing process of raising up parents' voices and listening to what parents are saying and taking seriously from their perspective what it is and what they want for themselves and what for their children. And then also really taking seriously the idea that families are their children's first teacher and their children's advocate. So with that, families need information, and they really need data, and they need, really clear pictures of how their children are doing, what their children are doing, and, what the next steps for their children can be. And then I think another important aspect of sustaining family engagement is really helping families develop relationships with other families. We know that often families sometimes feel isolated. Early childhood programs sometimes do a really good job of bringing families together, and then sometimes in elementary school spaces there's less connection for families. So what can schools, elementary schools, after-school programs, libraries do to create, connections between families so that they are building and supporting one another and sharing information and feeling more connected. And, there's some research out there showing that when families do feel more connected, that it's really related to family, that it improves family well-being. So I think that those are some key strategies that I think research sort of shows that are really important for keeping and sustaining and boosting family engagement.
Great. And so thinking about this, and you identified the various kind of model programs in your presentation, but are there any measures or tools that districts can use to identify the strengths of their current program and opportunities for them to improve?
Yeah, so, on our website, and I can search out, we have compendiums of measures that specifically look at family engagement, measures of family engagement processes. And we've put together different measures that are out there. So measures, about trust between schools and families, or measures that exist around why parents' motivation for getting involved. So for instance, we know that parents tend to get more involved when they feel confident, when there are invitations from school and they have the beliefs and attitudes that they should be involved. So that there are a variety of tools that are out there that can help measure things like that we know are associated with engagement, that communities can absolutely use and tailor and build for their own use. And I also really would I would suggest that people really check out the Silicon Valley resource, because I know that there are a number of checklists in there that around children's development and what schools can, good quality transition practices that schools can adopt, communities that can adopt. It can also be adopted in your own community as a tool to gauge where you are in your transition practices.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. And also, you spoke towards the connection between pre-K and kindergarten. And so I'm wondering, do pre-K and kindergarten teachers participate in shared professional learning about school readiness? And if so, can you describe some of the professional development topics you would recommend that they focus on or that you're aware of?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that there's research out there to show that sharing professional development with early childhood educators and kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers, second grade teachers, all in the same room really goes a long way to helping that alignment of curriculum, expectations, and assessment, right? Because if you're all thinking in the same space, there becomes, the shared understanding of the other's opportunities. One thing that we focus on here at the Harvard Family Research Project is specifically around helping educators think seriously about how to engage families in the transition to kindergarten. And we actually, it's a good question, because we have a variety of teaching cases, which in essence are dilemmas of practice. So real life situations that families, educators have experienced that are free and available online, and they're professional development tools that educators, whether in early childhood programs or in kindergarten, can use. I think Cora, I think you might have the link that you can add to the resource box. But the case that we have is the Bridging Worlds interactive case. And this is basically a case that describes one girl named Maya who is having a really hard transition experience. And the case goes through the feelings of the mother, the feelings of the early childhood teacher, the feelings of the Head Start director, the feelings of the elementary school teacher, and how they're sort of connected around doing the best that they can do for Maya, but also disjointed at the same time. So the case gives you an opportunity to sort of wrangle with some of the issues that come up in the case and also solve them on your own. So if you're interested in professional development around the school transition, I think that this is an interesting resource to check out. And it would be interesting to use it with elementary school teachers and preschool teachers together to see where some of the perspectives overlap and potentially where some of the perspectives don't overlap. So I hope that that's potentially useful.
Great. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you for all the great resources as well. I just want to remind everyone that we will be archiving the webinar after the session is over, and it will be on the REL Southwest website, and you'll be able to access the slides and also the links that we're providing to you today in the chat box will be available there as well.